Fatoum was born in 1928. She's 91 years old. This house carries a lot of memories for her. This is the place where she got married and lived her best memories. And it's also the place where she received the news of her husband's death almost 60 years ago. She comes to visit this house often to relive the memories of people who once lived in this village. But today she'll be doing the talking as she shares with us a tiny bit of her memories.
My wedding to Ali was simple. Like all weddings during that era, I prepared my wedding box, which was a small box brides must bring with them to their new home. It contained a pair of shoes, a shawl, 2 dresses, and a bar of homemade soap. Ali's family came to visit us a day before the wedding for the traditional henna party. They brought gifts of fabrics with them, and we prepared a dinner of couscous and pumpkin. Meat was a luxury in those days. On our wedding day, the women came to take me from our home, and the only way to transport the bride was on the back of a donkey. There were no cars or vehicles back then. Our village was a small one, and we were all neighbors. The distance from one house to another was not very far. The bride is taken to her new home by women only. The men had no role in this. The bride is engulfed in a large circle of scarves that covers all of her. I remember feeling like a corn cob in its husk. The weddings were small and simple, but very joyful and blessed. That's how my life with Ali began. There were many resistance fighters in the mountains surrounding our village. Most of them hailed from our village. It was as though the village was their support center at the heart of the mountain. Of course, the French didn't like that. I recall once, in order to force us out of our homes, the French forces came to the village and collected all the women from their homes and forced us into big trucks. We didn't know where they were taking us. They didn't even allow us to take our children along with us. Despite all the chaos, we experienced a funny moment when our neighbor Mbarka, who was too tall, hit her head when she was being loaded into the truck. The French soldiers were shouting at us to stop the laughter, but we really couldn't stop. We were being forced to move to an unknown place, and we left our children behind. All of this, yet we couldn't stop the laughter. The French moved us to a place far away from the mountains and dropped us off there. Then they brought the men, and then the children, and then they told us that they had destroyed our homes, and that we must build new ones in this new place. Just like that. They left us with nothing. Life back then wasn't easy, but the months following this forced, inhumane evacuation was simply brutal. It was long after that Ali decided to join the Algerian fighters in the mountains. When the French discovered he was providing them with support, they came searching for him in order to execute him. He continued to visit us every once in a while, but I didn't get to see him very often. Ali visited us with a group of armed men on his way to attend a resistance meeting in bin Omar's house, which was located in a nearby village. He then decided to spend the night in his aunt's home near the mountains. He spent the night writing military orders for the Algerian resistance teams all across the region, changing the locations and strategies based on the orders received from the higher leadership. The orders included a change for Ali himself, and he was ordered to move to Al-Hudna region. Ali came to meet me the next day, and he asked me to only pack the important things and prepare our kids. He said, "If Musa bin Arbi and Sa'id bin Da'i come to pick you up, go with them. And if it was and don't go anywhere with them." Later that night, at around 3 in the morning, I had still been up because my sick baby kept crying and kept me up. I had a very weak lamp directed at the roof, so that no one would see the light through the windows at that hour of the night. Then, The sound of bullets echoed from a distance. I immediately felt my flesh burning, without knowing why. I swear to you, my flesh started feeling like it was being burned the minute I heard the sound of the bullets. I started trying to ease the feeling by rubbing my legs. It felt like I was the one who was being shot at in that moment, and I don't know why. I couldn't sleep until Fajr, and I slept a little bit after Fajr until morning. In the morning, one of Ali's friends, Muhammad bin Sliman, came to the village. He didn't come directly to my house. He went to our neighbor, Ali bin Saad, and told him that Ali had been killed that night, and that they had moved his body to a location named Bogaz. I had just finished waking my kids, and started baking bread and preparing their breakfast. Before we finished breakfast, we heard our neighbor Fatma bin Arbi screaming, and she walked through our door and entered crying. Sidi Ali is dead. Sidi Ali is dead. I packed the bread I made, and I put it in the sack for my children to eat later. I looked at my kids, and to Fatma, who was still screaming. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't believe Ali was dead. I told my brother Abdurrahman to take me to see his body, wherever he was. He asked me why I wanted to go. He said, "Your baby is too young, and you must stay with him." I told him that I would take him with me, and I carried him with me. He was so small, only 2 months old. I knew I had to go see him, at least one last time. We arrived, and he was there, out in the open. I stood next to his head and wished him the mercy of God. He was shot right in the head. They executed him that way because he was injured, and he didn't die at first. According to what his companions told me later, he was with his 2 friends. One of them told the other that he was still alive and asked him to keep firing at the French while he dragged him away, but the other man fled, and the first one had to quickly empty Ali's pockets of the resistance's communication documents and left him there without any help, all alone. As I was standing there next to him, Sheikh Isa put his hand on my shoulder and told me to have patience. They didn't allow me to go back to my house and welcomed me in their house for lunch, but I told them that I must go back to my children. I went back to my home and started making dinner for my kids. I was in shock, but I couldn't even cry or shed a tear. There was no funeral, as everyone was afraid the French might use it as a justification to brutalize our village again. I had to let him go, in silence. It was not long after Ali was killed that France gave Algeria a referendum. The voting center was a bit far from our village, but not far from the voting center, the French had established a torture center, and the women would go voting, while most of our men were being tortured. The minute any of our men emerged from the torture center, they would directly head to the voting center with their wounds still fresh. Everyone knew the importance of the vote for our future. That evening, the French released a large number of prisoners. We had a big celebration in our village to welcome all of them back. It lasted until a very late hour of that night. By morning of the independence, the French troops had been gone. They left their bases at night, leaving only their dogs behind them. We started to hear the dogs barking in the nearby villages in the morning. Aside from the barking, there was no more of the usual sounds we had gotten used to. No military voices, no helicopters, no tanks, the silence of freedom. 3 men from our village decided to approach the nearest French base to see what had happened. They came back later to tell us there was no one left in the base, except for the dogs. Some hours later, a battalion of the Algerian resistance fighters arrived, declaring independence. The people were ecstatic. Everyone went outside singing national songs, and some of them carrying flags and celebrating. The celebration started in the afternoon and didn't end all night. The first thing I did after the independence was move back to my home. It is where I had shared my best memories with Ali. And the second thing was visit Ali to tell him that his dream had become a reality and that the freedom he was fighting for was finally achieved by his brothers and sisters who continued the fight until the end.
Although she moved to the city with her eldest son, Fطوم continues to revisit this place to recall the memories of Ali whenever she gets the chance. She's a solid woman who raised 5 children alone after the death of her husband. She also visits the resting place of her husband whenever she comes to the village. Never forgot him and never will, a living example of a rare type of loyalty.